Well, welcome everyone to the 2024 Neal B. Freeman Lecture. TFAS established this annual lecture nearly 10 years ago to highlight honorable leaders with a reputation as articulate defenders of individual freedom and personal responsibility. The lecture was established through a generous gift by Neal Freeman, a trustee emeritus now of the Fund for American Studies. First, a word about Neal Freeman. Neal is a man of many achievements in his career. They include as a journalist, entrepreneur, businessman, author, philanthropist, and award-winning television producer. As a television producer, Neal has produced more than 1,000 programs that have been broadcast nationwide and has won many awards for journalistic excellence, including a Peabody Award, an Emmy, and for three consecutive years, the Documentary Medal of the International Film and Television Festival. I could spend more time talking about Neal, but I think I should move toward an introduction of our speaker tonight. Mitch Daniels is someone whose name you should all know. I suspect you don't all know that name, but he's had a very distinguished career in public service, in the business world, in higher education, and in many other capacities. I could talk about him and use up all his time listing his achievements, his honors, his experience, and his career. But I'll give you a quick summary. Governor Daniels retired nearly 2 years ago as the president of Purdue University, a position he held from 2013 to 2022. Prior to that, he served as the 49th governor of the state of Indiana from 2004 to 2012. He was elected governor in his first bid for any elective office and was reelected with more votes 4 years later than any candidate in the state's history. He currently serves as a distinguished scholar and senior advisor at Liberty Fund in Indianapolis. Just a word about his tenure at Purdue University. Governor Daniels prioritized student affordability and reinvestment in the university's strengths, and the university prospered under his leadership. He ended 36 straight years of rising prices by freezing tuition and mandatory fees at 2020 levels for all students. That freeze is still in place today. As a result, the total cost of attendance is lower today than it was 12 years ago, even without adjusting for inflation, and aggregate student borrowing to attend Purdue has declined by 37%. Governor Daniels served on the Board of Trustees of TFAS from 1992 to 2001 when he became a trustee emeritus. In recognition of his leadership, both as governor and as president of Purdue University, Fortune magazine named Governor Daniels to its list of the top 50 world leaders in 2015. He served as the director of the Office of Management and Budget and a senior advisor to President Ronald Reagan in the White House. He's been honored for his achievements in education, reform of state government, wetlands conservation, and the strengthening of American institutions. He's the author of 3 books, including the bestseller, Keeping the Republic, Saving America by Trusting Americans. He's a contributing columnist to the Washington Post. You can always look forward to a great column from Governor Daniels in the Post. He earned his bachelor's degree at the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton and a law degree from Georgetown University. I know we're in for a treat tonight to hear his remarks, and we'll have plenty of time afterwards for Q&A. So please welcome Governor Mitch Daniels.
Roger Ream, friends at TFAS, especially to the students who are here, congratulations on your selection. Please, I know you'll use your time well. I know you'll leave this program as fulfilled and grateful that you took part as all those I've seen go before you. I've recently arrived at the moment in life where I don't have to do anything I don't want to. Up to now, work and extracurricular commitments have consistently produced invitations and meetings, conferences, trips, and the like that were matters of duty, when the interests of the business, the university, the state, the administration, maybe some campaign, required my participation. But as of a year ago, those days are over. I can pick and choose and do events only if I sincerely want to. I am, you could say, at last a free man. So I agreed to take part today willingly and cheerfully, and I have two powerful reasons for doing so. First, I'm a longtime admirer of the host organization, a former board member, as Roger mentioned, and always grateful for any chance to support its vitally important mission. A decade in higher education taught me that any academic department whose name ends in studies probably ought to be closed immediately. But the Fund for American Studies is a diametric exception to that rule in ways I hope this talk will illuminate. Secondly, there's Neal Freeman, our sponsor and benefactor today. However else you spend your time in this program, take a minute to learn about him and the life he has led. Dip into, as I do often, his book of essays called Skirmishes, for a fast lesson in how to defend liberty, even in the most hostile of environments. Like his mentor, William F. Buckley, Neal has done so with a wit, a depth of knowledge, and a sunny disposition that disarms his opponents and has even enabled him to infiltrate some of their most ideological, hostile institutions. It's a genuine honor to give a talk at his request. This is a time of much pessimism about the American experiment. I choose that term to avoid a common misuse of the term democracy, as when the current president or his minions tell us that they are out to save our democracy. First, as any TFAS participant knows, the system this nation gave the world a quarter millennium ago is not a democracy, but a republic. The limitations its ingenious constitution placed on central government were all about protecting God-given individual rights, inalienable rights, as the authors put it, against the depredations of fickle, swayable majorities. When Benjamin Franklin, accosted by an anxious lady outside Constitution Hall in Philadelphia and asked, "What kind of government have you given us?" he did not label it a democracy, but rather famously, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it." I say experiment to recognize not just the novelty, but also the fragility of the arrangement Franklin and his colleagues devised. No one was more aware or more concerned about the dangers ahead than the founders. John Adams speculated that the new nation might not survive beyond a couple generations, as the spirit of liberty and the memory of the sacrifices that birthed it atrophied. Some of the first coinage of the infant United States bore the inscription, "Exito in dubio est." The outcome remains in doubt. Foreign predators looked forward to our failure. The English made a point of signing the Treaty of Versailles, not with the new nation, but with each of the 13 states individually, anticipating an eventual collapse and a reopened imperial opportunity. Some dozen years ago, I wrote a book that was, in essence, an ode to the American people. I contended that we are still a people born to liberty, who can and should be fully free to make our own individual life decisions, and who collectively can combine to make sound judgments about our common future. I argued for trusting Americans once again with control over their healthcare spending, consumer choices, the education of their children, and the rest of life. I ventured the hope that properly informed and addressed as mature citizens, they would support the restraint on federal spending and statist expansion that is essential to prevent your generation from facing unpayable debts and unkeepable promises. In all candor, I could not write that same book today. The intervening decade has brought a worsening of the nation's already unsustainable fiscal position and a steady intrusion on the basic rights of property and free speech. Our national security and the armed forces that provide it have been allowed to weaken, even as sworn international enemies strengthen their own. The presidents and Congresses of the last 12 years have made our national debt picture alarming in 2011, not better, but unimaginably worse. Those few office holders who sought to advance the major reforms necessary for solvency were punished politically. The last two presidents, now the two candidates for the next presidency, promised not only to continue our descent into national bankruptcy, but to make it worse. Our wanton, mindless borrowing from your future has been my principal reason to fear a national catastrophe. But in the last few years, a diverse set of observers have seen danger coming from other directions. Conservative scholar and philanthropist Jim Pearson, in his book Shattered Consensus, foresees today's political fault lines, setting off a seismic political realignment similar to the paroxysms that saw the demise of the Federalists in 1800 and the rise of a dominant Republican Party in 1860. Pearson's Third Revolution, the New Deal of the 1930s, brought the advent of what became a long-standing consensus around market economics and an engaged, outward-looking American foreign policy. It's that framework within which the two parties competed but coexisted that he believes has run its course. He writes, "Polarization is characteristic of regimes as they begin to tear themselves apart in conflicts that defy resolution within the existing structure of politics." Looking through an economic lens, financial experts like John Malden predict that the accumulation of corporate as well as government debts worldwide will inevitably lead to a great reset when, in his reassuring words, the economy comes crashing down around our ears. Other prognosticators see the upheaval coming as the product of detectable and recurring long cycles. Financier Ray Dalio identifies 8 determinants of societal success, such as economic output, educational attainment, military might, and rates of innovation. By his reckoning, the U.S. is now at a disadvantage and declining in enough of these to produce a crisis, ending our world leadership and ushering in some kind of new order, domestic and international. Still another avid cyclist is the social historian Neal Howe. Looking back not just over America's short history, but all the way back to antiquity, Howe believes he finds highly regular patterns based on generations and their different experiences while young. Every 4 generations, or roughly 80 years, societies pass through a period of dramatic social change. With the last such passage happening with World War II and its aftermath, the U.S. is due for another, in Howe's term, 4th turning. We will pass through, these are quotes, a great gate of history, a bone-jarring crisis so monumental that American society will be totally transformed, in which the American Republic will collapse and the nation will emerge with a new collective identity. What an attractive prospect. There is, of course, a good chance that all these gloomy gusses could be mistaken. Doomsayers of the left have been comically wrong for decades. We were told that the fight to feed humanity is over, that hundreds of millions were going to starve by the year 2000. Instead, living standards have risen dramatically, and where hunger still exists, it's due to man-made politics, warfare, corruption, or government incompetence. The population bomb was a dud. The global demographic problem we now face is too few children and plunging fertility rates, the birth dearth that threatens economic growth, and the social safety net promises that nations have made to their older citizens. America was built by optimists, people with the courage and drive to risk all coming here and utilizing the freedom they found to build the greatest society yet seen on this planet. Any honest reading of our history must make one optimistic that, as we always have, we can get our act together, innovate our way past danger when it appears, to band together in the face of common enemies, foreign or domestic. I hope you are all optimists. Regardless how grim one's prospects, it's the only operating principle that ever makes sense. As an athletic coach I once had told us, if you believe you can or you can't, you're right. But a can-do outlook doesn't imply naivete. Our own eyes and ears, say nothing of the deep thinkers I just cited, tell us that our institutions are as shaky and maybe as unsustainable as our national fiscal condition. It can't happen here was probably a prevailing attitude in every collapsed civilization until its particular it happened. So it's worth some hard thought. If an abruptly different America is going to emerge in your lifetime, what should it look like? How will it be reshaped? And by whom? The last question is the easiest to answer. It will be, to use a term which has become a pejorative, an elite, some stratum of society that, especially in times of crisis, exercises disproportionate and decisive influence over what comes next. It may not be fashionable to say in these days when equity is supposed to trump all other considerations, but the actions of some, this is a quote, creative minority always determine such an outcome. It's the way of the world. Martin Wolf, the editor of The Economist, puts it bluntly. A complex society without elites is inconceivable. Creative minority is the coinage of Arnold Toynbee, one of the foremost cyclist historians. His 6-volume A Study of History presented the past as the story of societies rising, flourishing, then ultimately failing. His goal was to discover common patterns in their stories. Toynbee examined civilizations spanning millennia and every continent: the Egyptian, the Greeks, the Cynic in China, the Mayan, the Syriac, Babylonian, and Hittite in the Middle East, the Hindic and Hindu, the Orthodox Christian, finally Western civilization, some 21 in all. He concluded that their fate was determined by their response to the crises that sooner or later confront any society. And he claimed that that response, and therefore their survival or failure, depended on the performance of their elites, the creative minority, at the time crisis arrived. The decisive factor, Toynbee wrote, is the reaction of those actors to the ordeal when it comes. He spotted a consistent pattern linking the eclipsed civilizations across the continents and across the ages. A once energetic leadership minority loses its creative power to move society forward. That leads to a withdrawal of mimesis, by which he means imitation and acceptance of their norms and leadership by the majority. That's followed by a loss of social unity in society as a whole. Those words from 8 decades ago make for a fair description of our current situation. It's not improbable that your generation will be the one called upon to react to America's next great ordeal. Despite the wide variation in the causes they expect to bring on the reckoning, all these authors projected arriving at virtually the same time, late this decade or in the first years of the next. If they're right, it'll be you and those just ahead of you who will be occupying positions of influence as a shaken or even shattered society attempts to reshape itself. Here, a patriot and lover of liberty has cause for alarm. The cohort labeled Gen Z, your cohort roughly of Americans 18 to 29, as a group looks at life and at our nation very differently than I do, and I hope you do. Asked whether an assortment of values are important to them, only 32% picked patriotism, 23% having children, 26% religion and belief in God. All these figures are well under half those expressed by people in my age group. Asked if America is the best place to live, only 33% said yes, exactly half the percentage that prevails among all their elders. Only a minority said they would fight for our country if it were attacked. I repeat the fervent hope that our American experiment will move peacefully beyond its current challenges and continue its historic elevation of the human condition, here and anywhere our system is emulated. Maybe, as John Malden predicts, we will somehow, quote, muddle through the economic crash that he says is inevitable. But as is often said, hope's not a strategy. Let's consider the possibility that a really wrenching change by whatever cause is coming, and coming well within your prime adult years. Will you be spectators, victims, or architects of the America that emerges? We know the sort of people who will seek to exploit any such crisis. We've just watched their farm teams in spring training at what we once thought of as elite universities. We read their grossly slanted version of events in what we once accepted as responsible, objective organs of journalism. We endure the costs and impositions of the mandates and regulations they issue from unelected posts in a central government that is supposed to be constrained by a constitution, adopted by a free people to secure the blessings of liberty. These people, given an opening, will pounce on the chance to reorder American society according to their views of justice and equity. Enchanted with their own superiority, they will not waste effort trying to build popular support for the regime they envision. Death to America is not a slogan designed to persuade or to win over the allegiance of a majority. As Lenin proved in 1918, their kind of revolution doesn't happen by popular consent. It requires a vanguard and a will to power that justifies any argument, however specious, and any action, however brutal. So we know one type of elite who will be on the field if a fourth political revolution, a fourth turning, or some kind of great reset comes to America. The hope that brings me here today is that they will find, meeting them at midfield, a very different elite, a cadre of freedom-loving idealists prepared to contest and defeat the statists, who insist that if history does demand a new collective identity for America, it's an identity rooted in personal autonomy and the liberty to exercise it in shaping one's own life. The Fund for American Studies has been serving and preparing such idealists now for more than a half century. If not for many of them, our traditional freedoms would have eroded even more than they have. But the storms recent generations weathered were squalls compared to those that may be coming on shore for yours. An obstinate optimist can see the opportunity in even the worst circumstances, the pony in the manure of which our greatest modern president used to speak. So here's a shot at that. The scholar Mansur Olson, in his eye-opening book, The Rise and Decline of Nations, demonstrated that many of the great leaps forward of history have come in societies recovering from crisis or even disaster. Think post-war Germany, post-war Japan, or San Francisco after its near total destruction by earthquake and fire in 1906. Olson described the way that such cataclysms can undermine or wipe out encrusted institutions, vested interests of the kind that stifle competition, innovation, and the growth that enables upward mobility. Rules and norms that protect previously dominant factions are suddenly up for grabs. New movements and new leaders have a wide opening to define and build a new society. This opportunity may come to your generation. Neal Howe's 80-year cycles are driven by the big differences across 4 generations. Those differences, he said, are created by the widely varying experiences of their youth. Those born into fast-rising civilizations coming out of crisis, he calls prophets. Overindulged by their relieved crisis survivor parents, they tend to be defiant crusaders in their youth. 2 generations later, they preside as elders over the next crisis. When that moment arrives, their grandchildren will bear the brunt of dealing with it. This cohort, which he labels heroes, includes the elites whose reaction, Toynbee says, either remakes or breaks the society they inherited. My parents' generation struggled through the Great Depression and won World War II. Heroes is in every way an apt description of them. Along with the bulk of my baby boom colleagues, I'm one of Howe's prophets. So 2 generations further back, that makes you the next set of heroes, at least in his nomenclature. That label does not predict your success. It just means that your age group will be in the batter's box when history fires its next fastball at us. Will America hit the pitch, we could ask, to left field or to right? Or will it, like the fallen nations of the past, simply strike out and leave the field to some opposing team? My money's on us, or I should say, on you. If our current economy and institutions do, quote, come crashing down around our ears, TFAS graduates and those with whom I trust you are sharing the insights you're gaining here will be there to redefine and rebuild them, to show their fellow Americans that the way back to a successful society is to adapt to this century the principles which made our nation the most successful humanity has ever seen. To offer them an exciting, uplifting vision of the greater freedom to which they are entitled, and a confidence that they can be trusted to exercise that freedom wisely. Given the head start and the ruthlessness of the statist opposition, that'll take some gumption. But this too you already know. You enrolled in a program whose motto is developing courageous leaders. Many of you have lived and studied in environments where the American experiment and its founding principles are disdained, where its history has been falsified and its miraculous achievements ignored or denigrated. I don't doubt many of you have already had to demonstrate courage simply in asserting or defending these truths. The greatest leader of the last century named courage as the primary virtue because, Winston Churchill said, it is the one that makes possible all the others. As his life demonstrated, it is also a highly infectious quality. It is written that through his own unshakable confidence in them, he turned ordinary Englishmen into lions. One could almost say he was, for a time, a creative minority of one. At your age, you have known only a fractured, toxic, and dysfunctional America. You have every right to conclude, as apparently so many of your contemporaries have, that the American experiment has failed, that this is not a country worth loving, let alone fighting for. But instead, you are here. You have made the effort to absorb the truths and the lessons of our history. You've learned how this nation conceived in liberty has surmounted huge dangers before. I hope you'll view our present predicaments and even the large-scale crisis to which they could lead, not with dread, but with determination, even anticipation. If the moment calling for the next set of heroes does arrive, you will be prepared, thanks in large part to this invaluable program. You'll possess the knowledge, the idealism, and the ability to rally your fellow Americans to the reassertion of their God-given rights. All you'll need is the courage. Despite its motto, TFAS can't give you that. That you'll have to summon from within. I can promise you that the struggle, if it does come, will be fierce. It's axiomatic that the bigger the change you seek to make, the louder and rougher the resistance. Olson's vested interests never yield their privileged positions without a fight, and those who lust for power over others, by their very nature and ideology, will stop at nothing. Some of us have the scars to prove it. But I promise you equally that the fulfillment of the many achievements that await you will also be proportionate to the difficulties you overcome. Yours can be the fulfillment that the founders felt, that the greatest generation felt. I don't know where Neal Howe came up with his generational labels. I know I've never felt like a prophet. Most of my predictions miss the mark badly. But I think I know heroes when I see them. And I believe that if a moment of crisis, of turning, of a new collective identity for Americans does arrive, you and your TFAS counterparts will be there with the heroic courage it will take to see that the priceless American experiment does not perish from the earth. Thank you for this opportunity. Now for the good part.
Our staff has microphones on each side, so please give your name and where you go to school. And try to ask one question, because a lot of people are not.
Hello, sir. Thank you for speaking with us. I believe, please correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned that less than half the American population identifies with a religion. Do you believe that strong religious institutions are necessary for a strong nation? And if so, do you think the decline in what you mentioned in our country is due to the lack thereof?
Are you going to be able to hear if I speak from here? Is this audible out there?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
All right. Even easier. Thanks. That's a very interesting question, and it's been debated over the ages. I'll just say this. There certainly has been a theory from the beginning of the founding of this republic that our nation, that nations with free institutions could only be sustained by a people of religious faith who believed in a higher power, who believed that their rights came from that power, or at least from nature, not from the government. And my own view is that it is certainly easier to sustain those institutions where faith of some kind or another is widely prevalent. I don't think it is absolutely essential. I think that commitments to each other, to our common humanity, can substitute for it. I'll just say I think it's harder in the absence of the belief that there is a greater power to whom we are responsible and to whom we owe our existence and our rights. A wonderful question, thank you. Well, I sure was relieved to see those mics. I thought y'all were headed for the exits. And wouldn't be the first time.
Hi, I'm Ami Figuerutia. My question has to do with the role of foreign citizens in this crisis. So if the pandemic has shown us something, is that especially the United States and its allies are very interconnected. Their economies many times depend on each other. So as someone who cannot vote, and what would be, or what do you think would be my role in helping avert or fight this crisis?
And what's your home country?
Chile.
Chile. I think some of the best Americans I know are the most recent Americans, those who have come from elsewhere, who understand the difference, who understand the blessings of liberty which our Constitution seeks to secure. And I actually think that those who originated elsewhere, or at least have extensive experience in other countries, can be, as these debates proceed, the most credible, the most believable, the most persuasive. So please stick around.
Governor Daniels, my name is Isaac. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. My question has to do with what you mentioned about the infectiousness of courage and optimism more broadly. How do you personally maintain your own optimism in such a pessimistic environment?
Well, there are days when it's hard, although life has been, has certainly taught me to be an optimist. Again, I've been lucky enough to live in a thriving America. I've seen us surmount problems before at a different level at the state of, at our state. We came in at a time in which some people had given up on our state. It was broke, it was dysfunctional, and wasn't going anywhere economically. And we were able to look back 8 years later and see that people of goodwill working together, pursuing the right principles, can make a lot of difference in a reasonably short time. So as I said earlier, even in the dark moments, I don't know another operating principle that makes sense. If you don't at least start from the premise that we can win this, we can solve this problem, we can take care of our deal with whatever emergency we think is on our hands, then you're very unlikely to succeed. So I think a fair reading of our history, any fair reading of even of our present, with all the problems that I talked about and these writers write about, surely you know that there is no, you would not swap places with the richest person on earth even 50 or 100 years ago. We're very, very fortunate. If you start with that, it's not hard to keep your chin up.
Hello, Governor Daniels. My name is Juan. Thank you for your time and for your lecture. My question is related to, I would say, a part of your lecture that I think definitely touched on the American dream. I am reminded of this part of the inauguration speech by President Kennedy where he talks about what you can do for America instead of thinking what America can do for you. So my question for you is, what would you say the average citizen of this country can do to keep the American dream alive?
To insist on her or his own freedom and on that freedom for everyone else, and therefore for institutions which provably and without exception, when allowed to operate, lead to the uplift of people. You know, the American dream, of course, has always been about upward mobility. Tens of millions came here. You know, my grandparents, many of yours, some of you yourselves have come here for that opportunity. And we are, as long as we remember what got us here and try to protect, and in some cases, we're going to have to repair and restore the institutions that enable freedom, we will see the kind of prosperity which has been really the attractive part, the most attractive part of the American promise from its beginning. Now, let me just say a little word about public life. I hope all of you will find ways, at least in part of your lives and careers, to spend some time in public life, or at least in one of the entities that surround it and contribute to it. My own view, you will make your own decision. My own view, however, is as much as I admire the people who have given up their time, and some of them all their careers to that, that has never been to me, we should never allow politics to be the center of life. I told our teammates in government repeatedly, what we do here is not the end, it is simply a means. Government is what people, men and women of goodwill, should do to enable the really important parts of life to flourish. The businesses where people earn their living, the families where they nurture each other, the voluntary associations at which America is the unrivaled birther in the world. And I hope that you will take what you're learning, take the conviction that brought you here in the first place into positions of influence, but always remember what you're there for and what you're not there for.
Hello, my name is Stephen Weinstock. Thank you for speaking with us tonight. So over the last 90 years, it's been kind of my observation that there's been increasing executive overstep, whether that be with governors or presidents, just with mandates and legislating from their office, and pairing that with the observation that those with power will seldom then give it up. Having served in executive office, do you believe that there's a way to restore the original role of the executive in this country, or is it too far gone?
Steve, it better not be too far gone. It's a very perceptive and accurate, I think, observation. Now, two to tango, it will take legislatures reasserting themselves in ways they've been too happy to abdicate. Listen, the Congress has been only too willing over recent decades to abdicate its responsibility, let the executive branch do it, then you can go out and, issue a press release or a snappy tweet criticizing it, but you didn't have to vote for it. People are gonna have to be willing to step up to the responsibility to express themselves aye or nay, because to some extent they have allowed executives to overreach and overstep. I saw the same thing, by the way, in higher education with boards of trustees who had all the authority, if you looked at the bylaws, their constitution, to have kept order on campus and maintained some sort of balance and freedom of inquiry environments, all these problems that we're worried about now, and didn't do it. This is something that people many times could have prevented and didn't. So, yeah, presidents and executives will take all the rope you can get, all the leash that they can gather for themselves, but they ought not be allowed to do it. Great question.
Hello, my name's Neal Gordon. I'm from Fayetteville, North Carolina. And kind of my question to you is, you've had a lot of experience over the years as an industry leader with Eli and Lilly, as governor, and in higher education. And I was wondering, through all that experience, what's kind of one leadership lesson that's kind of held true for you during that time?
If I have to pick one, I'll say try your best to be a person people can trust. That is to say, live up to your own words. Deal honestly with people. If you say you'll do something, do follow through and do it. These, by the way, I think these are good operating principles at whatever level of your life, to whatever level your life may have taken you at the time. But if here's a small example that's not so small. If someone asks you to keep a confidence, keep it. You're here studying in a town where nobody keeps a secret more than 4 minutes, no matter how important it is. And, that is, first of all, not a way to inspire confidence in you and the possibility that someone will be willing to follow your lead, also simply a moral shortcoming. So if you start with that, I think you're halfway home.
Hi, My name is Javier. Thank you so much for your talk. So Socrates, his claim about democracy was that people were too ignorant to vote for themselves. And even though you made the distinction between democracy and republic, do you think that statement and that claim still applies to the United States and the voting base?
Well, we better not accept that. I think we have not demonstrated over the last decade or two the maturity of which I think we're capable. But I'm not going to blame that on the American people. They have not been addressed as adults in too many cases. And let me just say this. If there should be a fracture of the kind that some people think is fated, people will listen with new attentiveness and will be open to things that maybe they have not found appealing up to now. But once again, our founders didn't give us a democracy, everything voted on by everybody. But they did believe that we're capable of choosing people of judgment, of honesty, and of sufficient vision to serve us all well. And you need to aspire to become those kind of people.
Thank you, Governor or former Governor, for attending this. I'm Cameron Tomino. I'm from Newport News, Virginia. My question has to do with a comment you made in reference to your dissatisfaction with unelected officials. I would also like to bring into that discussion sort of that grassroots discontent that you've mentioned, specifically to do with elected officials. And that, I think, is part of the problem that we're going to run into when this crisis does come, is we might need to go back to the parties and review them and see how their outcomes are working out. So just from your experience of being an elected official from one of those two parties, what would you say is mainly a problem that we aren't getting maybe what we think are good people into these positions of higher office, and how would we go about fixing that?
Kevin, was it Kevin? Yeah. Cameron. There's no question that at least the current environment in which we ask people to operate publicly is deterring too many people who I think could serve very, very well and honorably from doing it at all. I hope it won't deter you. I hope that I think there's, at some point, I think there will be sufficient revulsion at the, we like to say, toxic nature of our public discourse, that people will demand something else, something better. Again, I hope it doesn't take some huge crunch to bring that realization to the forefront. I would like to think that eventually that 2/3 of Americans who tell every survey researcher that they are unhappy about the nature of our national conversation will assert themselves. Let's just hope so. I agree with you that it's not purely a problem of dereliction by our elected officials, except as Stephen's question illuminated, when those officials allow the unelected to go outside the boundaries that were set out for them.
Hi, my name is Josiah Wani. Thank you again for speaking to us today. So my question is kind of about ideas. So we're living in a world in which there's countless ideas of how we should best improve society, and all of them are conflicting and clashing with each other. And I'm sure as governor, you had countless people speaking in your ear with different conflicting ideas of how they thought you should act. So what advice do you have so that we can best use our judgment to separate the good ideas from the bad ideas, regardless of ideology? The first president for whom I worked, as in so many other instances I could suggest, probably said it best. Ronald Reagan said that some people seek public office to be something, others to do something. You know, which category are you in? I would hope by the self-selection that brought you here, you are all
by your natures are oriented to the do something category. But you have to, I think you have to start with that premise. And as I tried to say, the bolder, the bigger, the bolder the change you're trying to bring, the more certain it is that the folks who change always has its enemies, Robert Kennedy said, and that the pushback will be commensurate with the size of the goal you're trying to achieve. I'll just tell you that when at some point you'll look back at things you've done or tried to do or tried and failed maybe, and the fulfillment, the great fulfillment you'll have won't be from having won an election or some temporary success like that. It will be about something tangible you can point to that made a material difference in the lives of others. And if you keep that as your lodestar, there may be setbacks and so forth. They'll hurt at the time, but later on, if they were only temporary bumps on the way to a real success, you'll be glad for that experience, all that experience.
Hi, my name is Ephraim Jones. I just want to thank you again so much for coming. And you were talking about how only about a third of Americans hold beliefs now that used to be common sense, 50 years ago in every household. Do you think that's more of an issue of a more silent majority as social media has come on and created a more peer pressure amongst issues? Or do you think that it has actually become an epidemic of people taking away from American values? And if so, do you think that that's a more we need to encourage people to speak up, or we need to start shifting the majority?
Well, you all would know better than I do, because these are roughly your contemporaries that I'm reporting on. I choose to believe it's temporary. First of all, I don't hold it against young people. I hope I communicated that. Those who have only seen, let's just say, not the best days of our republic, the last 10 or 15 years, those who have only been conscious of public events in that time period have every right to have a somewhat jaundiced view. But a fair reading of history, if we can encourage that, the kinds of things that that are part of the TFAS curriculum, that'll give you some perspective that if you only look at our current situation in the last few years, you might not have. We're going to have some great national successes. I believe this, especially if y'all are in charge. And these attitudes, I think, can come around in a hurry. Listen, we've had all kinds of experiences in my lifetime in which public opinion was about the country, about its prospects, about its leadership were very, very negative, and they turned rather quickly when better alternatives showed up and delivered results.
Good evening, sir. My name is Rajiv, and I want to thank you for your time and the talk. I wanted to ask you to touch upon a point you spoke about earlier on how the starvation and population threats were an issue, and there were people who were saying that stuff, but nothing actually fruition of it. All I want to say is, isn't it because they pointed it out and waved red flags that we were able to innovate and solve that problem? So it's them it's them speaking out that's what solved the problem.
Oh, I think I'll give them, these people, credit that they were concerned about the right issue. They were completely wrong about how to solve it. It was free people and free markets that innovated, that brought us the green revolution, that lifted living standards just in your lifetimes, or if you add 10 or 20 years, there's been the greatest upsurge in per capita incomes, in nutrition, in the decline of premature deaths, all these things. More change in the last 30, 40, 50 years than in all of human history. So the doomsayers were completely wrong. By the way, their prescription was more government, more state control, and that would have been a disaster. we would have lost millions of people who are with us today. So always try to be empathetic and try to see things from the other person's standpoint. I will say, I will give many of these folks credit that they were concerned about the right problems, but I think they had very, very poor ideas and poor recommendations about how to deal with them.
Hi, I'm Haley. Given our current culture of voter apathy, how do you see the reinvention of patriotism that you talked about?
Well, I'm not sure how apathetic we are. There's some people I wish were a little more apathetic. You know, let me suggest sort of an alternative view. What bothers me at least as much is the nationalization of everything. Everybody bringing, you know, because of particularly the information environment we're in, the way it's changed. You know, I'm more troubled that too many people have allowed politics to take too central a role. You know, when people at Thanksgiving, when people write columns about how not to fight with your family over politics, I mean, like leave it out, leave that for some other time, right? We've allowed, I think, this to occupy too big a place in our thinking, our consciousness. You know, when I hear that people don't want their child to marry somebody of a different persuasion, or even young people saying, I don't want to have friends who have a different point of view. That's a very poor foundation for a government by consent of the governed, in which we sooner or later have to meld or blend our views together. No, you know, look at, you know, if not the turnout, which has been pretty high in some recent elections, but just the passion, sometimes to unhealthy levels, which people have brought to politics. I'd rather see a little less of that, honestly.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you for speaking with us. My question is, you kind of alluded to, and something I've noticed both online and in person at school, is that our generation is feeling dissatisfied and they are feeling angry. And a lot of that comes from being taught the promise that was made to us by the people who formed our government, by previous generations, and now feeling that the older generation has let us down in terms of our economy, in terms of our personal liberties being protected, all sorts of things. Except now they are starting to speak up and they don't feel respected and they don't feel like they're being listened to. So how can we start to make a space for ourselves so that when we do speak up on these topics, we are being heard?
Well, if I look at the events of this last spring, I don't think we suffered from a shortage of attention to the views. I think some of the views being expressed and the way they were being expressed were left a lot to be desired. But I think that I mean, let's face it, some of the techniques that you all are expert in, social media and so forth, have given everybody a microphone, everybody is a publisher now if they want to be. Never been a time when it was so easy for an individual voice or a small group to make itself heard. What I think we're lacking right now are institutions that are responsive enough and delivering real progress against those things that are troubling people. You know, economic growth has been at the essence of the American dream, and we've got to emphasize or re-emphasize policies that inure to the economic benefit of the broad population, as America has always delivered for them. Otherwise, our speeches about our freedoms and so forth can ring hollow for some people. So I concentrate much more on that. Whatever lies ahead of you, I don't think the biggest problem is going to be nobody's going to hear you. The question is, what they hear make sense to them? Will it be persuasive? Will it bring people together? Will it rally them to move in a positive direction, or simply make them more angry with each other the way it too often does now? Thank you.
Joe Stars is telling me we have time for 2 more questions, so that's one of each mic. I think Governor Daniels will be happy to stick
I'll stick around.
So come forward if you didn't get your question asked from the microphone.
Hi, Mr. Daniels. Thank you for taking the time to listen to all our
Y'all are
questions.
the most polite people I think I've ever.
So my question was kind of talking about 2 specific ideas that you had within your speech. The first one was talking about how our generation represents these idealistic heroes, that our generation is going to kind of have to help out America. But you also talked about the idea that an elite is also going to have to be the one that makes the decisions for America ultimately. So my question is, I'm kind of concerned because I feel, at least right now, the elite that represents America, at least in the Senate and the House, the average age for the elite is somewhere around 65. Mm-hmm. And so that would be nearly 2 generations before our generation even got a chance to kind of make actionable change within the Senate and the House. And so I was wondering if you were concerned about that at all.
Well, first of all, I agree with you that we need, and I think we're inevitably we'll see. We're seeing an infusion of younger talent, and we that's very much in order. Again, I'm not vouching for House theory. It's a little bit formulaic, and he may be superimposing this model of his on history more than the facts warrant. But I think that he's probably right in saying that if there is a break point, if there are problems or crises of the dimension that do happen in history, that younger people are just as likely to have, people in the middle of their careers at least, are much more likely to have to be heard and to take leadership because those before them will plainly have failed. So get ready.
Hi, Mr. Daniels. Thank you for being here. I'm thinking about the founder's argument that virtue is necessary for self-government, and really just looking around at society now that is either rejecting virtue in any traditional sense or even more redefining it. How do you see moving forward the possibility of effective self-government when we're rejecting virtue?
This is such an important question. It's a great bookend to the very first question we were asked, which was about, is religion essential or merely very important and conducive to free institutions? Virtue plainly is. It can come, as I tried to say in that first answer, it can come from other than a purely religious perspective. But a government, by consent of the governed, does presuppose, I think, at least a level of morality, of ethics, which includes a commitment one to the other, not a pure selfishness, grasping. Those are the peoples who are most susceptible to tyrants and dictators and authoritarian systems who promise to make their life easier. So the virtues that have sustained this country over time, self-reliance and personal responsibility and compassion for others, yes, I think a central responsibility, I'll go back to the gentleman who wanted the one-liner leadership question, bookshelves need to be have been written about that question. But clearly a part, I hope, of your leadership years will be to model virtues as we've known them and to encourage that in others and to help people understand these aren't limitations on our humanity, on our humanness. These are, as the great philosophers have always said, these are the ways in which happiness is allowed to flourish. Remember what we were promised in that original document, only three things: life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Happiness is best pursued by virtuous people. Thanks so much for having me.